welcome to Trip the Beltway Fantastic. Today we welcome a special guest, my good friend John Kiriakou, who I have known for many years now as a whistleblower, intelligence expert, a defender of the Constitution, author, broadcaster, and all-around wonderful human being. John has spent the last many years co-hosting the political Misfits show on Sputnik, but now co-hosts the new Deprogram show with his old colleagues, Michelle Witte and Ted Rall. He pops up with great writing on consortium news and is the author of The Reluctant Spy, My Secret Life in the CIA's War on Terror, among other books. Within just a year, we have gone from government censorship of so-called disinformation brought on by reactionary responses to COVID and Russiagate to now foreign students being literally abducted off the streets and put into detention centers for having the wrong attitude about the Israeli government. Free speech and due process is being tested like nothing before, and it is unclear how far it will go until it encroaches on citizens, particularly those working in advocacy and media organizations that deal specifically in foreign policy and national security. In a way, it feels like 2003 all over again, with the global war on terror. And, I thought it would be a great time to bring my friend John onto the show to talk about how he might be feeling. John, I feel a little bit whipsawed between one administration and the next. How are you feeling these days?
Whipsawed is a word I wish I had thought of. I feel the same way. I was deeply disturbed by some of the actions taken by the Biden administration. I am just as deeply disturbed by some of the actions taken by the Trump administration. You mentioned the Constitution a minute ago. I'm genuinely worried that Donald Trump is willing to disrespect the Constitution to the point where he will even disrespect or ignore the mandates of the Supreme Court vis-a-vis the Constitution. And then what do? I've been hearing from all points on the ideological spectrum that we are headed very quickly toward a constitutional crisis, something that we have not witnessed before. I guess really not since Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus. And I'm really disturbed and frightened about the direction of the country.
I mentioned the disinformation campaigns and the censorship that were rife during the Biden administration, particularly against conservatives and other unorthodox thinkers and broadcasters, YouTubers. And what it seemed at the time was a real movement, particularly on the right, for free speech, against censorship regimes, against government-funded organizations that were set up to be minders of speech. There was an entire debate over what constituted the right speech, which obviously put people like me, put Sputnik and other media organizations in the crosshairs. But now it seems like some of those same folks, even in the administration today, are supporting what seems to me a real, not so much of a challenge, but a real dismemberment of the First Amendment on college campuses today.
Oh, yes.
And so, can you talk a little bit about that part of the whipsaw? How and did we see this coming down Broadway? That not everybody's a free speech advocate. It really takes principles here, and not everybody has them.
I think, especially as it relates to Israel, we probably should have seen this coming. I happened to be in New York earlier this week, and I had dinner with Ted Rall, my friend and colleague on Deprogrammed. And Ted is a graduate of Columbia University in New York, and he lives in the neighborhood. He lives just a block or two off of the Columbia University campus. And he said something that was just chilling. He said that as an alum, he uses his alumni card to, go to the library, walk across campus, go to events and speeches and different things happening on campus. He went on campus on Monday. We got together on Tuesday. And he said there were plainclothes private security guards at every entrance to the campus. Now the campus is open, right? It's New York City, for heaven's sake. But on literally every block, there are these groups of men in plain clothes, but with windbreakers that say special security on them. You have to show a Columbia University ID just to get on campus. That's never, ever happened before. But even with the Columbia University ID, you're not allowed in any of the buildings anymore. And if you have the ID to get on campus, you have to be going somewhere or you're told to get the hell out.
Wow.
Get off campus. And he said he doesn't know who these security people are. They're not uniformed. They don't have badges. They're just rent-a-cops. But he said this is like trying to get onto a college campus in the Middle East. When I was stationed in Bahrain, one of the things that shocked me was that the University of Bahrain does not fall under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Education. It falls under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Interior, which is where the intelligence service and the secret police reside. It's kind of like what we're seeing at Columbia now. Like Columbia is not a free campus. Free speech is out of the question. If you don't toe the pro-Israel line, you're going to be thrown off. You're going to be arrested. You might be expelled from the United States if you happen to not be an American citizen, even if you're a green card holder, even if you're here legally,
right?
You haven't broken any laws. If they don't like what you have up here, you could be on the next plane out. We've already seen it. And this is just, I'm just gobsmacked by this whole thing. It is exactly the opposite of what we should be as a country.
Right. I mean, do you think it's permeating the American consciousness that all of this revolves around the protection of another country, that we could go out and burn the flag, the American flag, right now in the middle of the street. We could set up a soapbox on the corner in front of Columbia University and start railing against the United States government, and in so many myriad terms. But if we did the same thing about Israel, we could be led away in handcuffs. And I'm not exaggerating on that point. Do you think this is getting through to Americans, that all of this, the resources, the violation of constitutional rights, the deportations, the abductions of kids off the streets is to protect the feelings of another country, not even America?
I do not think Americans are taking that in. I think most Americans, God, I even hate that I'm going to say these words, but I think most of Americans have been sucked into the Zionist political mainstream. You know, I think that most Americans, and I'm talking about even friends of mine, smart people, educated people, worldly people, just toe the Benjamin Netanyahu line. I taught at, of all things, Liberty University, like 16 years ago. Is that right? 17 years ago. And I'm still on the listserv for adjunct faculty. And I mean, these are people who have PhDs, mostly in international affairs. And they're just cheering on the administration's efforts to just scoop up anybody who's not 100% pro-Israel and throw them out. And the thing is, it's not even just pro-Israel. You have to be pro-Netanyahu. And if you're not pro-Netanyahu, you're an anti-Semite. And when
I think that's the crux of it right there.
It really is. And when I've objected to that, it does. That's exactly right. It puts a chill in speech. When I've objected and I've said, look, in the history of his political life, Benjamin Netanyahu has never garnered more than 27% of the vote. Right? There are 100 political parties in Israel. About 8 of them are represented in the Knesset. He and his Likud bloc have never won more than 27%. And the response was, well, the ones who vote against him are the Obama Jews. It's like, what does that even mean? The Obama Jews. That doesn't even make any sense. But I hate that they have used that argument of that any criticism of Israel constitutes anti-Semitism to just squelch free speech. You can't have an argument now about, or you can't have a debate about Israel now.
And what's ironic is that you can have that debate if you're in Israel. And
Yes.
Israeli press, whether
yes.
it be Haaretz or the Times of Israel, have stories all the time criticizing Netanyahu, raising the specter of him as prolonging the war purposefully to save his political hide, emphasizing that there are protests going on, emphasizing when his government does stymie or violate ceasefire agreements. Very openly, we can't have those same discussions here in the United States.
Right. Yep.
And we're really seeing the real negative, if not scary, outgrowth of that, with our green card holders and student visa holders being abducted. And they're not even being deported at this moment. They're just being held in detention centers without charge while this all goes through the courts, which just really breaks my heart that you have, like the woman who had been picked up at Tufts University, for writing an op-ed. Critical
just minutes. Yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Minutes before you and I began talking, a judge upheld the government's decision to hold her without bail. She's not even accused of having committed a crime.
Right.
How can she be held without bail for writing an op-ed? And she's here legally. She's a PhD student here legally. No one is arguing that she broke any law, but she's being held without bail pending deportation because she's not pro-Israel. Stunning to me.
What I like to point out to my conservative friends who, and most of my conservative friends, I have to say, are constitutionalists, and so they're very uncomfortable with what is going on. They might not be out there on Twitter talking about it or on podcasts, but what I do like to point out is like this could absolutely boomerang against the right.
Yes.
A Democrat comes into office in another 4 years, and they could start abducting students from Hillsdale and Liberty University for not upholding specific attitudes towards trans or minority rights, and could be if they're student visa holders or worse, it could be at that point full-blown citizens could be targeted for not having the right attitudes. And we could, look at Russiagate. It could be you just writing something nice about Russia or saying, I want peace in the Ukraine war. I want it to end. I think we should talk to Putin. And that might target you as anti-American or pro-Putin, and you be collected up into a van and hauled off.
Kelly, when I was doing my show for Sputnik, I had this daily radio show 5 days a week on Sputnik. It was 2 hours. And I'll preface this story by telling you that in the 7 years that I was there, 7+ years that I was there, not one single time did they ask me to say something or to not say something. I was utterly free to discuss anything I wanted and to take any position I wanted. On the day of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I opened the show by saying I unreservedly condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and I urged Russian troops to leave Ukraine immediately. And then we started the show. Nobody batted an eye. So anyway, on Thursdays, I used to do a 30-minute segment called Criminal Injustice with Paul Wright, who's the founder of the Human Rights Defense Center and the editor and publisher of Prison Legal News magazine, and with Kevin Gustala, who's an independent journalist, investigative journalist, and both are great friends. So we were talking about the Kids for Cash scandal in Pennsylvania, where this judge was incarcerating children and then taking a kickback from the private prison company. So the more kids he sent to prison, the more money he got. The Washington Post happened to listen to, or a reporter for the Washington Post happened to listen to the show that day. And the next day in the Post, they wrote this article about Russian propaganda on our airwaves. And they said that John Kiriakou, former CIA officer, has this show, and this is what he was talking about. And they said that I was weakening our democracy by talking about these issues, that I was giving the Russians an opening to broadcast propaganda against us. Not that the crooked judge was weakening democracy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I was weakening our democracy. And to agree with your point, it's going to boomerang again. And when the Democrats are in the White House and in control of the Congress, you can bet your bottom dollar that they are going to go after conservatives and Republicans and leave all the constitutionalists out, in the wilderness. Like you, most of my conservative friends are constitutionalists. I consider myself to be a constitutionalist, even if I approach it from the left. I have a very close, very dear friend who I know is a friend of yours as well, Bruce Fine. And
Yeah.
Bruce talks about this every single day, that we've got conservatives and we've got progressives, and neither of them have ever bothered to read the Constitution. That's part of our problem. Our problem is we pay lip service to the Constitution, but when push comes to shove, nobody really works to protect it and to implement it and to uphold its principles.
I was just thinking about that yesterday. I have, through the years gone to the Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, in Washington. I've gone to many, what you would consider conservative or right wing or whatever Republican confabs, as a journalist covering these things. And one of the leitmotifs of each is the Constitution. And sometimes you'll go to your seat and there'll be a little pocket
I love
Constitution
those.
on
I
your
have
chair.
like 3 of them. Yeah.
I know, and I do too. And what bothers me about our current moment is that a lot of those folks, and I'm not like, I can't think of anybody specifically, nor would I want to do that for the benefit of this conversation. But many of the people who have been throwing the Constitution in my face, like literally and figuratively over the last 20 years, are some of the loudest voices for deporting people without habeas, with lying about somebody's criminal record, one that doesn't exist, just so they can expel them out of the country and into a dungeon in El Salvador. Suddenly, the Constitution has no, it's not worth anything to them, or at least it's not useful for that given moment. So they completely ignore it. And I find, it's obvious that the hypocrisy, but it bothers me that people can cave so quickly. It makes me wonder about their motivations. It makes me suspicious about people that I come into contact on both sides of the aisle every day in Washington, because you never know when they might flip. And we see this in issues of war as well. People who are anti-war 1 minute, and then they rush to
like the Democratic
intervene.
Party's leadership.
Exactly. So we see that on both sides. So I'm not trying to attack one or the other, but this is so visceral to me, because it's really slapping us in the face. And let me ask you another question about the current speech issue and moment. Do you find, now, having been in sort of community of whistleblowers and those trying to protect journalists like Julian Assange. I know you were very heavy into that movement and in getting him free for all those years. Do you find some of those people, are they split currently in terms of how they are seeing the Trump administration, particularly those who have been fighting against censorship and discrimination on the Russiagate issue? Where are those folks right now? Are they?
Yeah, that's a good question. Most of my whistleblower friends went over to the Trump side in this most recent go around, 2024, and I would say to a man or a woman, they've been disappointed. The thing is Joe Biden was so bad that the conventional wisdom was nobody could be as bad as Biden. And then Trump won. Everybody was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. And then he's begun just suspending our civil liberties one at a time. And now we're kind of stuck. So who's going to save us? Is Pete Buttigieg going to save us? Or Amy Klobuchar? Seriously?
Yeah.
So it's like now everybody's confused. Everybody is saying, oh, we wish we had a viable third party. Well, yeah, that's why I've voted Libertarian the last three elections, because we need a viable party, and the voting for the lesser of two evils is still evil. And so if we're going to say we need a viable third party, then we need to put our money where our mouths are and vote for that third party.
Yeah.
So I have to say I'm not optimistic in the near term. I'm really not, because I'm not seeing great differences between the Democrats and the Republicans. You can sort of argue that around the fringes of things, there are some policy differences. But at the core, there really aren't policy differences where it comes to attacking our civil liberties. They're both doing it. And nobody's arguing otherwise. I mentioned Bruce Fein a moment ago. Bruce's big issue is the War Powers Act. And, every time a president sends troops somewhere, he's violating the War Powers Act, and it's an impeachable offense. Yep. And nobody cares. And when I say nobody, I mean no members of Congress care. Maybe Thomas Massey cares.
Yeah.
But that's about it. Otherwise, nobody cares. And if they're not going to care about something as fundamental to our Constitution as the provision of troops in harm's way overseas, then they're not going to care about anything.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the fact that we're bombing Yemen as we speak, and have been for the last month. And to me, another disappointment, because Trump did run in part on ending endless wars. Now, I know he emphasized that probably more in his 2016 campaign than he did this time around. But this time around, he emphasized that he wanted to be the peace president. Yes. And actually helped broker the ceasefire in Gaza that's since been violated. And so again, this wild ride between having a president who had promised a more restrained foreign policy because he felt like it was an American first thing to do, to doing the same thing that Biden did just a year ago, was to bomb the hell out of the Houthis in Yemen, which again is having seemingly no effect whatsoever. Let me ask you about the deep state, because if I know you, that I would think that you would be supportive of dismantling a lot of the negative mechanisms within the government that have built up over the years, that have allowed agencies like the CIA to do things in secret, for the DOJ for them to go after their enemies down the line. I do believe that there is a deep state, and it is nothing to do with Donald Trump. We have seen all through the global war on terror how the national security state has ballooned, with justification of 9/11. How are you feeling about how Donald Trump is actually going about dismantling the deep state under the guise, I guess, of Doge. I mean, again, disappointed, hopeful.
A little bit hopeful. First of all, there is a deep state. There is. We have to acknowledge it as Americans. You don't have to call it the deep state, right? You can call it the federal bureaucracy, or you can call it the state, or the intelligence community, the blob, the swamp. But there really is a deep state. And I've said this many times. One of the reasons why we have a deep state is because they know that they can outweight any president, right? A president is in office for 4 years or 8 years, and the deep state employees are there for 25, 30, 35 years. If they don't like a president, they just wait him out, and they'll always come out ahead.
Yeah.
I was heartened when Donald Trump began to announce federal layoffs. And frankly, I don't really care how he goes about doing it. He can do it by having 17 CIA officers escorted from the building because they happen to work on DEI issues. I don't care. That's 17 people that we don't have to worry about tomorrow. Now, of course, a federal judge has put a hold on those firings, but you can seriously cut in every one of these agencies, and there's not going to be any great change in what they're able to do. Okay, number one, I was absolutely thrilled when Donald Trump announced 5 years of 8% annual cuts to the Pentagon budget.
Yeah.
Now, over 5 years, that comes to just over 45% of the Pentagon budget, which is over $1 trillion a year now. That kind of a cut would be unprecedented in American history. And I think it is absolutely the right thing to do. The question is Congress going to take up those kinds of cuts? And I think that answer is a very clear no. No. Donald Trump is going to be president for 3 more budget cycles. And these people all know they can outweigh him. Yeah. All of them. They're not going anywhere, but Donald Trump is. And these people are just going to wait for 3.5 years, hope a Democrat gets elected, because it's the Democratic Party that is the party of the deep state and the party of war. I love the Republicans too, with Mike Pompeo and Gina Haspel and the likes of those two. But the Democrats have been, there's been a flip in party ideology, I think, where the Democrats used to be the peace party. They would march in the streets to stop the Vietnam War and stop the Iraq War. And now it's exactly the opposite. So I don't think Donald Trump is going to have any long-term effect on the deep state. I think that, appointments like, my friends on the left are going to kill me for saying this, but I think that Pam Bondi at Justice is great. I think Kash Patel, I don't really know Kash Patel, but we need somebody to really churn things up at the FBI. And if anybody hates the FBI, it's Kash Patel. So I think that's a good thing. The FBI is out of control. But I'm not seeing those kinds of changes at the CIA. Not at all. I'm not seeing them certainly at the defense contractors. They're all still getting rich. So I'd like to see real cuts, not just headlines, cuts in the headlines, and then nothing ever happens. We need real cuts because there is a deep state. It can be dismantled, or it can be at least weakened. And we need to take that very seriously.
What about the cuts to, if not the elimination, I know it's caught up in court right now, of USAID, of the United States Institute for Peace, Department of Education, the Wilson Center, gone.
Right.
I mean, to me, having been in this town for like almost 25 years, this is huge.
Huge.
That takes a big chunk. And even if these programs are somehow reconstituted and brought back online, I feel like it might take another generation to get up to where they were and their power and influence over the consensus thinking and policy of this town. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Because that really goes at the intellectual heart of like the blob.
Yeah.
When you go after these.
It really does.
organizations.
I actually have kind of mixed feelings. Um,
Hmm.
let's start with the easiest. The U.S. Institute for Peace. Never understood why we have such a thing. We're the biggest warmongering nation on the planet, and we have this quasi-governmental Institute for Peace. Why? In a
Yeah,
magnificent headquarters building at 23rd and Constitution. It's
absolutely.
magnificent.
Yeah.
What do they do all day long? Why do they sit there and write papers about how great peace would be? Because they certainly don't have any impact on policy.
They have a lot of regional experts who are
Yes,
writing reports and books and
it's a
having
think tank.
panels, and
Yeah,
it's a think tank.
yeah. See, and I have a problem with most of the big think tanks here,
Yeah.
because they're funded by the Pentagon, the CIA, NATO, the State Department. They have on their boards.
Defense contractors.
Defense contractors are the big donors. On their boards are, every living former CIA director, every living former secretary and deputy secretary of state, half the secretaries of defense. Like, seriously,
Yeah.
that's where you're going for your expertise on how to make peace. The heads of the CIA and the Defense Department, the State Department. USAID. On paper, USAID is a great idea. I always say that, there wouldn't have been an Al Qaeda if there had been real economic development and education in some of the poorest countries in the world. That's kind of beside the point, because USAID isn't really about international development. It's about providing easy cover for the CIA. And nobody trusts USAID. Nobody does. Everybody just assumes that they're CIA. Most all of them are not. But just the fact that it's known that the CIA has used USAID for cover negates the whole, viability of the organization. When it comes to things like the Department of Education, conservatives have long said that the Department of Education educates no one. Well, that's true, but it's not meant to educate anybody. It's meant to be the creator of educational standards and to oversee the federal loan program. The problem there is not the Department of Education. The problem there is Congress, which has made education loans exempt from bankruptcy discharge. So Congress needs to fix that. There are going to be big cuts in HHS, something like 40 or 50% is what the administration is looking for. I think the big cuts should come from DOD and the intelligence community. Yesterday, Marco Rubio said that there would be cuts of as much as 40% over the next 5 years at state. Fantastic. But let's get it through Congress and actually implement it. And not just state, but DOD, CIA, and the associated members of the intelligence community as well. If we're going to be serious, if this administration is going to be serious about being the anti-war administration, then let's do it. Not just talk about it, let's do it. And may I make one other point? My friends have made fun of me because I've said repeatedly over the last several months that, as we said in the 70s, only Nixon could go to China. I say today, only Trump can go to Iran. And now we're learning, just this week we learned that Benjamin Netanyahu came here last week to specifically ask the United States to attack Iran. This is something he has done with every single president since George H.W. Bush. And we always tell him no. But we learned that Trump was considering bombing Iran as early as day before yesterday. But instead, the Iranians agreed to talks. The talks on Saturday went well. There are going to be follow-up talks. And if anybody is going to be able to make peace with the Iranians, it's going to be Donald Trump. We need an independent foreign policy, not tied to Israeli national interests. You know the old saying, there are no permanent friends. There are only permanent interests. This is an example right here.
Yep. Right, exactly, which George Washington had warned us against entangling alliances.
Indeed,
and
he
this is
did.
the apotheosis of it, this
You're
relationship
exactly
with
right.
Israel. But I mean, it sounds to me from the reports that I'm seeing and you're referring to is that Trump may be listening to his better angels within the administration. He has let in a number of people I would say, are fellow travelers in realism and restraint. And he's listening to those people like Tucker Carlson, who have been
Yes.
banging on against the war in Iran since the first Trump administration. And so I'm hoping that that's the case, that there is a very active debate going on within the administration between the pro war neoconservative hawks and these restrainers. And that heartens me that there actually is a debate going on, because you don't normally see that.
Yep.
On issues of war, at least, and national security within an administration. So I'm going to leave it on that, because that's a hopeful note from compared to the beginning of our conversation. But I'd love to have you on again to talk more about Iran as things unfold there, because we are running into another round of discussions in Rome this weekend between the Trump administration and Tehran. So anything can happen. I'm hoping it's positive, and I hope that you and I can talk about it some more.
I look forward to that. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Enjoy seeing and talking with you again.
Pleasure.